Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. How you feeling today? Chris, what's going on?
I'm here. I'm looking forward to all the good things we have in store for this episode. How are you, Carrie?
I am good. And I think the audience really in for a treat for this episode. So, Chris, why don't you tell them a little bit about what this episode's about?
I mean, this episode, we got the chance to sit with Jennifer Tomlinson and talk about race, ethnicity, and nationality. And I mean, it was a great episode because we got a lot of insight into sort of things that a lot of people have opinions about. And we touched on relationships between Caribbeans, African Americans, Africans, and we took a deep dive into understanding a lot of the terminologies and the misunderstandings that exist within the community. So I really am looking forward to the opportunity for people to hear this and give us their feedback because it's a really powerful conversation.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned in that episode, I met Jennifer through a client, and what was really key, she gave us definitions, breaking down race, ethnicity, all of these things. And then with this new terminology, help us kind of understand. And really the impetus for her also having her on the show is to really start building that bridge and kind of dispelling like Caribbean versus Black Americans versus that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, for me, I was always trying to get to a place of why are we here and how do we get past this? And I think she did a really good job of helping us understand certain things of how we behave as Caribbean.
Absolutely.
And you know, African Americans and what that means. So don't tune out. Don't be like, it was a great conversation. That we ran some jokes in it. We, you know, as we say in the Caribbean, sometimes you take serious things, joke.
Exactly.
But in the last though, we got really serious about some topics. I think it's like Chris said, a really powerful episode. And I can't wait for you to hear and give us your feedback because I'm sure people gonna have a lot of opinions on it.
A lot to say. And we look forward to it. Whatever you do, express it because that's how things change, right? It's through conversation. And especially conversation that each party is listening to. So let's listen to each other and listen to this episode. And we're both looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right. So let's get right to the episode. Jennifer, welcome to Carry On Friends podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And we also have Chris. Chris, welcome back to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm good.
We have a male voice in the mix, you know, so don't worry. We'll try not to put you too much on the hot seat. So, Chris, everyone knows you already a little bit, but Jennifer, tell everyone a little bit about who you are, Caribbean country you represent, and, you know, all that good stuff.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Tomlinson, and I am first and foremost an educator. Right now, I'm the interim dean of learning support at Valencia College, but before that, I was a professor. So I taught African American humanities for several years, ancient and classical studies. And then the last couple of years, I've been teaching student life skills. I also have a podcast, quick podcast plug, Black Women Be Well. Check it out if you have time. And I also do a lot of equity work. So I'm a SEED facilitator, which stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. And I do workshops and stuff. So I am, as you've heard, I've just listed about 3 different jobs, which is indicative of my Jamaican heritage. So I am not Jamaican. I was born in New York, but my parents are, my family are. So got to represent the people, you know.
You know, that wasn't the question that I was going to ask you, but tell me why you see yourself not as a Jamaican.
Yeah. So when I go to the island, I don't know nothing. Can't do nothing by myself. Can't navigate the world or nothing. So I say the same thing about New York when people are like, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Florida because I can't take the subway by myself. I don't know nothing when I'm up there. So, but to your point, if I identify as Jamaican culturally, of course, you know, being raised in a Jamaican household, but I know people could in Jamaica would call me from foreign. Like they could tell like a mile away, uh,
So you wouldn't carry or use the title Jamaican American?
I don't. So, I mean, I would. I mean, it's not like I don't mention that I'm Jamaican, but I very much see myself first when we talk about identities or circles of selves. I always kind of identify myself as a Black woman first. I don't know why. I could go back in my own life to figure out why I racially describe myself first, besides like where I'm from. That usually comes secondary or the third identity that I mentioned. But that's just really how I've been navigating the world, identifying my race and gender first.
Ooh, so we are already like in this. All right. So I'm familiar with Jennifer because she's been a guest on another podcast that I produce, Bridge to You with Monique. And on that episode, you described or explained the difference between race, ethnicity, and I think it was culture. So could you share the differences and all of that good stuff?
One of the things that I do with the equity, inclusion, and diversity work is I like to set the stage by clarifying terminology, because a lot of times we use words interchangeably when they don't really mean the same thing. And we end up having conversations that aren't specific and nuanced enough to address a particular problem. And one of those things is the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality. Those three terms are usually used interchangeably when they absolutely mean different things. And it's also the identities that people usually will describe themselves through. So do I have some time to break down to define?
Okay. That's why you on here, girl.
So race. Awesome. So race. We all know race is a social construct. It is something that was made up. It is not real. There is no genetic marker in your DNA that can indicate what color of your skin is. That's just not a thing, right? Race is a social construct that was used to control. And it's always centered between white and black, whiteness and blackness. And so you'll have these other racial categories that have developed over time. Those racial categories usually developed out of a socioeconomic or political agenda or economic agenda. One example that comes to mind is Mexicans at one point were considered white in America. Then in the 60s, due to immigration agendas, they were labeled as non-white, not black, but non-white, which isn't a racial category either. But you'll see that it's always centered with all these additional racial categories. It's always centered between those two polarities. How close to whiteness am I, or how close to black am I? So Asians are in that middle ground too. They're not white, but at least they're not black. So that we all know it's a made up thing. It's confusing. It doesn't even categorize people correctly because no one is the absent of color or that no one's actually black. Or no one is actually white. It doesn't even categorize people correctly.
So, let me just jump in really quickly and just ask this question, right? So you kind of said there's no genetic marker that says you'll be of this color. Mm-hmm. But when you physically look at someone, clearly this person has a lighter shade and this person that has a darker shade. How do you explain to someone that's like, well, they light versus somebody dark? Certainly genetically, there's something that says, or skin color comes out different. So maybe that's why some people say, well, he looks close to white and that person looks close to brown or black.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a geneticist, so I don't know how that, I took it in high school in the biology chapter. I can't, I don't remember how it works per se, but it's the same way as someone that, if I have blue eyes, but I have a child with brown eyes. It's just the nature of how genetics work. It's the same thing with, a light-skinned person, if we're thinking about colorism, end up, maybe having a darker child and they don't know where it came from. And it's, it's just how kind of genetics work, but it's not really a thing. And we know when we're talking about Black and white, we're not actually talking about people, we're talking about systems. And that's why race in itself is just a flawed thing, a flawed concept, because it has nothing really to do about biology, actually. It's about systems and how we categorize each other to control systems and to create a class system, essentially.
All right. I'll let you continue with your definitions.
Okay. So ethnic identity is where a group of people share similar history, ancestry, culture, these are all ors. It could be language, it could be a history, it could be an ancestry, a religion, any grouping of people that have a very strong commonality. This is why when you look at the continent of Africa, we racially think Black, they're all the same. All Black people came from Africa, but we don't realize how diverse the continent is. It is full of different ethnic types and ethnic groups, right? And the same thing with Hispanics. You could be racially a Black Hispanic, an Afro-Latina, but ethnically you're Hispanic. And it just depends on what is the culture, what is the thing that is bringing the people together to see themselves as an ethnic group. One other culture that comes to mind is Jewish people. And Judaism is a complex concept because it's two things. It's a religion. The religion itself is diverse. Like there's Black Jews, white Jews, right? But there's an ethnic group that share a common ancestry and a common language and a common background. And that's been all shaped through discrimination and war and the Holocaust over a long period of time. And so they are an ethnic group. But you look at them, they look racially white, but they're ethnically Jewish. And you can see in their lineage that they've been discriminated against based on their ethnic identity, but not so much their race, but definitely for being Jewish. So that's another example of an ethnic type. Then we have nationality. A lot of people lead with their nationality, thinking, because they feel highly connected to where they're from. That's a different thing. And so I know we kind of were talking a little bit in the pre-talk, and so I'll talk about my mother again, and she doesn't mind. She knows that I use her as an example, but you'll hear people say like, I'm not Black, I'm Jamaican, right? There's a disconnect or a misunderstanding of what race is versus where you're from. A lot of people from Africa that migrate over do the same thing, right? Like, well, I'm not like y'all, I'm from Nigeria. And that's fine. I mean, it's a part of your identity, and certainly you can definitely identify with the place of origin you come from, but you just can't confuse it with race and ethnicity. It's not the same. Some people only can recognize one of these. Maybe you only recognize your race or your ethnicity or your nationality, or maybe you have all three. Like you identify with your race, your ethnic identity, and your nationality, right? But the whole point of that is to clarify, because they're not the same, but we use them interchangeably because we just don't know better. And so we can't have specific conversations and address nuanced problems with doing that, right? It's not clear.
So an example of someone who could fit in all three could be, I'm a Afro-Latina from Panama, exactly. Right? Because exactly. That is that's who I think of when I think of that. So they racially, ethnically, and nationality in terms of identification. Chris, did you want to jump in?
No, I wanted to hear the definitions, because it also, this is the first time I've heard this entire, I've heard it broken down in different ways, but hearing this is educational for me. So I just wanted to listen. I'm going to jump in a second.
Let me clarify something else too, because people also use the word Black and African American interchangeably, and they're not the same. One, obviously being Black is the racial category, and people don't know that African American is an ethnic identity. So this is why really knowing what you're talking about and knowing definitions is really helpful, because we can have a Black racial conversation And that's encompassing of all people Black, from whether or not you're native to America or, you migrated over. They're just Black issues. And no matter if you're African, Jamaican, Haitian, African-American, being Black in America, you experience similar things, right?
Mm-hmm.
and there's some things that we need to fight for. There are some things that we want social restoration for. There's a call for social justice for, and we can come together on that. But sometimes we have to talk about African Americans as an ethnic group. African Americans who are the descendants of Africans that were brought over as slaves to America have had a particular lived experience and have experienced particular social injustices that have never been rectified. So we talk about things like reparations, and reparations could be anything. It could be money, it could be 40 acres and a mule, and free education, whatever. When people are talking about, Black people need to get reparations, what we're really talking about are African Americans, right? Because the U.S. has not addressed the social injustice and the human rights violations against African Americans. So, because African Americans are a particular unique ethnic group. So when we use those words, Black and African American, because we think we're being politically correct, we interchange those words. They're not the same. Some things are the same, but they're actually not the same.
Ooh, all right. Again, we're just setting the foundation here so we can get into that. So does it then make sense that with your definition a while ago and, kind of opening our eyes, the group that calls themselves ADOS, they're already African American because they are of that ethnic group, instead of saying, hey, I'm ADOS. And if anyone's listening, like, what are you talking about? The acronym means African American descendants of slaves. That's what they say online. So explain a little bit about where that comes up and how is that different really from African American, or is
I've never even heard of that before. You're teaching me something, Carrie Ann.
What?
Yeah, you're so funny because you took everything out of my mouth, Carrie, and I was just going to touch on ADOS. So ADOS is actually, they have been very vocal, especially during the elections. And if you're on Clubhouse or there are a bunch of ADOS rooms on a regular basis, and they're very, very, very serious about the fight and not including everybody else who identifies as Black in their fight for reparations and so forth. So, but what are your thoughts? Obviously you touched on the fact that, as you said, African American as an ethnicity, that stands alone. I can't be a Jamaican who was born in Jamaica and raised here and identify myself as African American, but I can identify as Black. Right. So I couldn't be looking to get reparations with African Americans because I was born in Jamaica.
Yeah. And based on your definition too, my daughter, my children cannot even say that they're African American. They are Black Americans, basically.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
Wow.
Right. Look at us clarifying things. Listen, I had never heard of that ADOS before. I'm not really hip, so I'm not surprised. But it makes sense. Listening to what you guys are telling me, the need to constantly redefine is a fabric of the African American experience, because they have continuously have had to redefine who they are, to clarify constantly. And think about the fact that we moved from the N-word, Negro, colored, right, and then African American scholars in the 1960s attempting to edify the ethnic group. And edify the continent of Africa, finding connections back to Africa, even though their ethnic identities were lost, but still trying to at least connect to the continent, turn to words like Afro-American. Y'all remember that was the PC term in the 80s, 70s, 80s? You remember that? And so for a long time, you heard Black Americans or native descendants of slaves in America saying, I'm Afro-American. Don't call me the N-word. I'm not a Negro. Don't call me colored, right? I'm Afro-American. And then we transitioned into African-American. And it's this constant pathway of clarifying, finding identity, and having those specific conversations. And I'm not surprised that this ADOS things have come up now, and that's just clear in the pathway because we've muddled the words. African-American and Black are not the same. So, and for them to even have to push farther and just come up with another word, because we can't seem to separate the concept of race and ethnicity, is not a surprise. And they are asking for specific things. And it doesn't mean we can't still be a part of the social justice work as Caribbean Americans. If anything, it's better for us to be allies and advocates, because social justice work is it's just good for everybody, right? And ethical and just laws are good for everybody. So of course, I'm still going to fight for them. I'm going to do the same thing for Indigenous people, Asian Americans. So it doesn't mean we can't be a part of the cause, but yeah, they are owed some stuff, and the stuff I'm owed, I need to go back to Jamaica and get that. I need to, start some stuff up on the island. Where's my reparation from slavery?
Oh yeah, that's serious, because Jamaica has a lot of issues that we need to deal with.
England has a lot of issues it has to deal with, because it colonized all of us.
Yes.
I'm just so glad to be having this conversation. So, okay, now that we've level set, we understand what is Black, a racial construct. It's fabricated, made up stuff. We understand ethnicity. There is a group of people with similar language, or whether it's religion or ancestry, and nationality is the nation you come from or identify with, right? We touched on ADOS, right? So we could talk about comments we've seen online where Caribbean people feel like they're better than African Americans, or Africans feel like they're better than Black American. It always feels like the immigrants from the diaspora, the Caribbean and the Africa, are in one corner, and Black people born in the US are in the other corner. Not sure where this friction came about. I've heard stories that back in the 60s, that when a lot of the Caribbean immigrants were coming over into the US, they started taking jobs at the lower rate at which the African American group were saying, no, pay us more. But Caribbean immigrants were coming in and said, like, yeah, just pay us these pennies and we'll take it. But that's one story. And then there are other stories in terms of the disrespect that Caribbean people show, and Caribbean people say Black Americans lazy, all of these things. But I'm curious, what do you think is the source of this divide and conquer situation that we are faced with? Because really, that's what it is. Somebody started it. I don't know who, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the history of this.
So I can't speak to the history too much either. I don't know too much Caribbean history. But I think that there are some assumptions I can make just from the conversations I had with my own parents, and doing this equity work long enough and hearing the stories of many immigrants. I think that when you're escaping, you're leaving your country for a better life, and the American dream is like the thing that drives people to come here. You don't want to be attached to any potential negatives that were a part of your previous, your past. And so maybe there's this urgency to make sure you self-edify yourself in this new space. I think that could be a part of it. I also think that there's this, whenever you migrate over to another place, there's this urgency to assimilate and to conform. And if you're looking for, and like I said, race is a black and white thing, right? And what is the dominant culture? What is the class that you want to model yourself after? In this case, it would be white, right? How to be centered in whiteness, because that's the dominant class. That's the class in power. So when you come to America, and you're looking to still, you hold on to your roots, maybe at home in your family or in your small community of people, but publicly facing, like at work, in stores or whatnot, you want to assimilate and conform closest to the class in power. So I think a part of that too is trying to separate from Blackness. So I'm not Black, I'm Jamaican. I'm not Black, I'm this. And I heard stories from my mom when she said when she came over in the 80s, that was reinforced by white people. Well, Peggy, you're not Black, you're Jamaican. So part of that even played out from white projection. So I think there's that might be a part of the history, and I would assume that that's definitely a part of that. Now there is this concept called model minority, and it was coined by Ellen Wu, or at least that's where I read it in an article she wrote. She's Asian American, and she talks about, you know, the dynamic of being a model minority and how that's used to center ethnic and non-Black people closer to whiteness. And so there's definitely a part of that. Well, I'm not like those Black people. I'm a good minority. I go to work and I don't disrespect those police officers. I'm not a thief. And that again is that attempt to center yourself closest to white, or at least in this case, whatever the dominant culture is that you're trying to conform with.
I've definitely heard and understand the concept of model minority and see that at play in, you know, these are why Indians are an exception because they're smart, they work hard, and Asians and from the Caribbean or Africa. And I think even it came up recently when, you know, a couple years ago at the Winter Olympics, and the young Asian girl, she did exceptionally well in one of those things, and they were praising her. And I did hear Asian colleagues were like, yep, there's the model minority, because she set as a gold standard of, look, her parent, because the narrative in the news is like her parents came here when they were like in the 80s, they didn't know English very well, or setting up these things like, this is what you can do when you come to America. So I definitely have heard these stories. Chris, you have any question yet?
I mean, listen, I'm a Jamaican that's listening, right? I'm listening intently. I mean, you know, a lot of what you said, you know, really sort of touches a lot of what I experienced, touches on a lot of what I experienced when I first came to this country, because I was being told often by certain executives that, oh, you know, Chris, you're so different. You're not like them. And I'm like, you know, you're different. And I actually cornered a guy one time and I said, what do you mean I'm different? Different how? And he goes, well, you know, he realized that he probably said something he shouldn't have said. So he kind of started to walk it back a little bit. But essentially what he was saying was, I'm not like African Americans. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, I want to be, you know, I want to identify with African Americans because they paved the way for us to even get to this country. You know, if it wasn't for all the different, the civil rights movement and all the different movements that they spearheaded, we wouldn't be able to come to this country and have anything, much less, and be recognized as human, as a man, you know, a whole man.
It's funny that you share that story, because I work with educators who out of their mouth have said, you know, in my class, all the immigrants work hard. All the Indians and Africans and Jamaican. And Jennifer, you know, you're Jamaican. I know you work hard because I teach chemistry, and those kids really put in the time. But, you know, I don't know what's up with these, you know, African. And I've heard educators say out of their mouth those types of things, and already kind of, you know, categorizing us, and then assuming from the moment that Black boy comes through the door, because he was born here, he's already operating at a deficit. And that really just boggles my mind that, you know, even in our classrooms, the classism is perpetuated by those that are supposed to be facilitating knowledge and nothing more, but it's implicit. And they've been told the story too, that the immigrants work harder because they have something to fight for. These African American, they get on the welfare and they don't fight, they don't work hard, you know, which is completely a false narrative.
So
sorry, go ahead.
I want to come back to this idea, because we understand that, you know, race, ethnicity, and nationality, right? And we do understand why ADOS exists, or this, as you said, the need to redefine and to clarify, you know, their existence as a ethnic group that has been, you know, a lot of wrongs been done to them, really, right? And I'm also not going to negate a listener's experience with someone who maybe they didn't do anything to this person, but this person just doesn't like them because they're of Caribbean heritage. So I think I want to bring it back to, okay, we're in the house, we're talking to our cousins out there from Trinidad, Barbados, whoever, right? How do we begin to have conversations about, okay, you might feel this way about Caribbean people, but did I specifically do this? How do we get from these very broad, you're like, Carrie, why you ask me such a question? You're like, no, listen, she didn't even say, she went,
It's such a good question, but it's a good question.
I mean, because this is not to kind of say, okay, Jennifer, Carrie Ann, and Chris have found a solution, but how do we begin to have those conversations? How do we begin to check ourselves and the reality of what you're saying, or privilege as immigrants and being seen as a model minority in some cases, because in other cases we are druggists, we are, all of these other things. But when it's convenient to the group that sets the rules, right? Yeah. So how do we begin to have these conversations about very broad stroke stereotypes about,
I think first and foremost, become very self-aware that model minority thing is a myth. And us Caribbean people are Black in this country, period. So let's get that out of our head, that somehow I can feel better about myself because I'm at least Jamaican or whatever instead of Black. That's the system is designed against you too. So just let's just rectify that. And even what Chris says really resonated to me too. You said, I want to be connected with African Americans. I want to be associated with them, because what I feel I hear you when you say that, what I hear is you see the kinship, and so there's a need for allyship and advocacy. And as an immigrant, you can be an ally because maybe you occupy spaces that they might not have access to, or at the end of the day, you just want to do good work to help people that deserve it. And so I think if we see ourselves as allies instead of, the separation, that's the first step. The next step, you ask a specific question: how do we begin to have conversations? And I tell this with all allies that, I tell it with white women that want to be allies to Black women, Black men that want to be allies to Black women. And I didn't coin this word. I have a great colleague. His name is Rudy Darden. He put me onto this. He said, there's going to be a wall of distrust. You just got to deal with it. And the wall is considering the history, the legacy, the trauma, the fact that they're still trying to have a word for themselves. Y'all have to get that through your head, how impactful that is. Over hundreds of years, they still trying to get a word to describe their unique experience because they get gulfed up into every issue as just Black. I mean, that must be just terrible. And they have never gotten restitution for all of the crimes against them, right? So when me and my Jamaican self go over there and say, it's not that bad, or you can just, you just got to work a little harder. My mom made me go to school. Your mom didn't do good because she didn't tell you to be an engineer. I mean, you're going to get hit with a wall. And even if you mean well, you're going to get hit with a wall. But that's what allyship is. You stay by the wall. And that's okay. The wall is there. Hopefully, through time, it'll come down. And honestly, it's not our duty to tell them what they need or what they should do. We're just allies. We're just there. And they tell us how we can participate. And that's the advice I give white women that want to be allies. And that's the advice I give Black men that want to be allies. You're going to get a wall. And that's just how ally relationships are. And that's okay. That's a part of the process. And considering that there's never really been a strong relationship for a long time, I mean, we're building new bridges. So it's going to take work and it's going to be hard. But for someone that wants to start conversations, get self-aware real quick. You already learned the terminology. Now you're smarter. You can have specific conversations. We can talk about Black issues, but know that sometimes we have to talk about other specific issues, right? So stay educated. Stay deep in the work. Read books on equity, inclusion, on diversity. Learn the history. Learn your own history. And then when you're in conversations and you get hit with the wall, you sit there and just take it. That's
the take it part is going to be the problem for a lot of us Jamaicans, because we don't know if it take nothing. Who I talk to? No, you can't talk to me like that.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. You know, get a little patient. Take some deep breaths. Pray.
Patience. That's it. Patience. And so now, you know, when you talk about that and you talk about the wall of distrust, I think that's a very serious thing, a very real thing. Now, what about the immigrant who wants to help as an ally and saying, well, okay, so I have this business and I want to hire more people from my community. I live in Brooklyn and in an African-American neighborhood, and I want to hire and do this. Is that considered being an ally, or is that overstepping because you don't know, you're not looking?
That's dope. That's how you build relationships. So yeah, I mean, stuff like that. That's real allyship. And that helps build bridges. When you're building infrastructure together, that's how partnerships grow. And it shows that I'm investing. And so it's an equal exchange. So I think stuff like that is wonderful. And when we can come together. And the thing that's unique about our relationship as Caribbean people and African American people, we're still Black. We still got stuff that we fight for together. We still work together.
That leads me to the question I've been wanting to ask you, and maybe it's a cliffhanger because, you know, we may need to pick it up in a part 2, but you've been alluding to that. There are Black issues that we all have to deal with, whether you African, you Jamaican or Caribbean, Trini, or you Black you Black from America. What are these Black issues that we need to kind of be paying attention to because we're caught up with this other stuff?
If you're a minority, don't just be concerned with you and your household. I know that's a thing. You know, I'm not going to, I don't stir the pot. I'm not interested. And this is something that happens with Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans, where they want to be Black when it's fun. And then when it's time to do work, all of a sudden, it's not me. I'm not Black. You got to be mindful of that. When you like our culture, but you don't like our work. And the types of things that we are in need of is criminal justice reform. What work are you doing? Are you participating in your state and local governments? In Florida, you got to vote. You got to be because our local politicians are not your voice, right? Our healthcare system is disproportionately disserving the Black community, especially Black women. We need some reformation in that system. Healthcare, just in total, access to it. And those are real issues. And then there's this, overall issue of just economics. Are we pouring back into our communities? Or are we doing what minorities or immigrants always do? You get your come up and you leave, and Yeah.
And I mean, they've been Chris and I were just talking about that. There are examples of when immigrants, they are on the come up and they're no longer. So we look back to history where Irish need apply. Italians weren't Italians. They were Italians. And once they made it from being this not quite white and over to white, it became very different. Yeah. So, and again, it just goes back to that definition you had. And then how did they not be non-white to now be considered
white?
They're
white.
but remember when they first came here, they weren't.
But you're going to transition if you at least look white. I mean, you're white. I mean, we're going to get as close to whiteness if you want to assimilate, but you're not white. It's not going to happen. That's not going to happen for us. We're not Irish. We're not of European descent. And it goes back to how it was set up years ago with people like John Locke and classical philosophers who from the beginning have framed that Africa is a continent of dark animals, all the things that they called us, ignorant. It goes back from that foundation. Africa has never been edified as a continent of greatness, and therefore all the descendants from Africa are and as long as we have a mindset of class, we'll always be at the bottom, and that's it. So as much as you want to get close to whiteness as you can because it's safe, or you want to be a part of that elite class, Black people, Caribbean people are not going to cross it. It's not going to happen.
Nobody could have crossed it, no matter who can manage the water.
No, unless you look white, the one drop rule, unless you look white and you deny your blackness, that's the only way you're going to cross. And God forbid somebody find out in the 1900s, 1800s, somebody find out, you get killed.
Shoot, find out, better have that baby and that baby come out looking dark.
Yeah, messed up. Okay.
It's going to be crazy.
Looking a little too caramel.
Listen, I saw a documentary on Amazon, and the girl was like, why look so dark? And then they pulled up this picture. Her grandfather, her great grandfather was Sicilian. Long story short, turned out her mother had an affair on the husband with this black guy, and that's why she looked so dark. And I kid you not, but she knew she was different. She grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood, and when the father found out that the wife had an affair with this black man, oh Lord, it was not nice. But yeah, these things happen. If I remember the name of it, I'll tell you. But yes, my husband and I were looking at it like, what in the name of?
I want to know.
Yeah, I want to know. Send me that movie.
She made the documentary. She talked about how hard it was, and she ended up going to school in DC, and when she got there, it was the first time she saw people of color, that kind of looks like her. And she finally felt like she belonged. But she's like, yeah, they dug up this picture of this great grandfather who's Sicilian and looked dark, and maybe that's how why she dark.
The mother was trying to explain that away. No, ma'am.
And it looked like the mother was still having an affair with the dude.
Oh my gosh. But Carrie Ann, I just thought of something. There is a book called Me and White Supremacy. Mm-hmm. It is written by a Black woman, but she's an immigrant. Her family came from somewhere in North Africa or something. I'm not sure, but it's a great book. It's written to help white people deal with internalized white supremacy. But I have a great colleague. Her name is Dr. Kanishiro, and she's Asian American, and she read the book. And she said it is powerful for non-Black people of color who need to do some healing because they might be internalizing white supremacy and doing that, being close to whiteness stuff that we do. And I imagine it would be a great tool for immigrants as well, because the woman that wrote it herself is an immigrant, a woman of color who migrated over here. Oh, Qatar. I think she's from Qatar. And the book comes with a workbook or journal that you can work through, because you got to unearth that internalized racism. You got to get rid of that. And you thinking that you're better because this or that, and they looking at us, y'all all Black. Like at the end of the day, we're
Yep. Yep. I just so enjoy this conversation. We might have to have a part 2. Chris, look like you're itch for asking a question.
No. I was looking up while you were talking. I was looking up the author's name, Layla Saad. Yep. For the book. But I was, I think one of the things I'd wanted to touch on, you were talking about the last point we were talking about in terms of being an ally, is, So what are some of the programs that are in place right now? I know you're doing a lot of work yourself, but are there programs in place to help sort of bridge the gap? Because the thing is, I feel like if there are no bridges being built or the bridges and being repaired so that we can start working together, we'll not be able to get through all the things we need to do, the criminal justice reform and all the things, our civic responsibilities, working together. We won't be able to get through that. So it's like we need to start building those bridges or repairing those bridges. And if you're doing something, how do we start? Where do we start? Big questions, I know.
I think that's a great question. And as you're asking me, I don't know that there's any form that I know. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I certainly don't see it a lot, any formal programming that's intentional about bringing the experience of African Americans and Caribbean people together. We don't even know that we're different. First of all, we didn't even know the words were different. So there's that part. So I don't know that I've ever seen any programming that's intentional. And I think that speaks volumes. So I really don't know. But when you were talking, the things that came to mind was at least we have some common grounds together. We love each other's music. We love each other's food. We love each other's people and fashion sense. Like there are things that are bridged, that there is potential to just take off and run with it and do deeper work beyond entertainment and socializing. So there's not a lot of bridges, but at least there's some connections that we can grow something from. And Chris, I think what you said is so profound that, once we start to clarify terminology and issues, we can be really strategic and intentional to create programming to bring us together.
Absolutely.
We should start it.
Well, no, so it's something that I've been talking to my dad about seriously because, this is a conversation I had and started some years back when I was in high school. And that's how I ended up on WLIB back in the day. I don't know if you remember, if you're familiar with that radio station, but the bottom line is, it's something we've been talking about more recently to do just in writing through our publication, because I feel like I talk to a lot of Jamaicans and I've tried to dispel that notion with them about, American people lazy, them Black American, them know our work, them just want our welfare. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Where do you get that from? It's this false narrative that I'd love to find out where it all started. But the bottom line is, if it wasn't for them, you couldn't be here.
Yeah.
I couldn't be here. None of us could be here.
Yeah.
So just like, and the same lazy people that you see that you quote unquote say they're lazy and they're on welfare. If you go to Jamaica, you got lazy people in Jamaica too.
100% accurate.
And I also talk about this fact that it's part of why Harry Belafonte, Shirley Chisholm, while they were all of Caribbean heritage, they all worked as part of the movement because they saw it as something bigger. We talk about this all the time. The challenge that we face as Caribbean is that, and through the other show that we produced, Strictly Facts, history is through the construct of white folks, right? So they tell what they want to. So, Shirley Chisholm or Harry Belafonte not being from the Caribbean wasn't important to them, right? But as our collective history, as part of our unity, that's where that information could be valuable, because not to say we're taking back Marcus Garvey or we're taking back Malcolm X or Shirley Chisholm, but to show that, listen, we're part of this struggle and we're part of this fight. And that education in terms of the roles that Caribbean Americans play in the civil rights movement and why we should continue that legacy of participation is not well documented, or people are educated enough about it. And, on both sides, on all sides, really. So I think that's why it's pretty critical. But before we wrap up, the name of that movie on Amazon is Little White Lie.
Okay. Little White Lie.
That's so appropriate. Little White Lie.
That was a good title.
Yes. So she made that documentary. So as we wrap up, Jennifer, tell everyone where they could reach you and any last words.
Sure. You can go to my website, blackwomanbewell.com to get, to subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel and all that. I also have an Instagram. You can follow me at BWomanBeWell. That's the letter B, woman, letter B, well. And if you're interested in bringing some equity or inclusion work to your institution, or I do other workshops on emotional intelligence, and I have a long list of options.
Jamaican. It's the Jamaican.
You already know. Please feel free to email me. You can email me at contact@blackwomanbewell.com or my institutional email, jtomlinson2@valenciacollege.edu.
Thank you so much for this really wonderful conversation.
You done set this up and you bring a knowledge to the people. You are an advocate, an ally, a social justice warrior. I appreciate you even inviting me.
We got to do, we live in this country. We got to also work to fix it as best as we can, play our role. Chris, any last words before we sign off?
Well, thanks for having me. And this was great. It was very educational. And I hope that, our listeners will appreciate the knowledge. And now that you open up your email, Jennifer, it's going to be flooded.
I bet.
All right. And as I love to say at the end of the show, walk good. The Carry On Friends podcast is produced by Breadfruit Media, and new episodes are available every other Tuesday morning. You can listen to the podcast on the website, carryonfriends.com, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to your podcast. The Carry On Friends podcast is produced by Breadfruit Media, and new episodes are available every other Tuesday morning. You can listen to the podcast on the website, carryonfriends.com, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to your podcast.